Ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome from sunny Berlin. My name is Daniel Stecher. I am very much delighted to have another insightful airline crewing and operations Enigma session with a real industry veteran. I saw his LinkedIn post from Bill Rathert a couple of weeks ago that he is retiring, and I thought that would be a golden opportunity for the community to learn a little bit more what he was really experiencing. So I asked him a little bit, and what he replied was already very interesting. So I'm very glad that I could convince him. So he's really talking how really he saved an Hollywood blockbuster and more. And I think you counted round about 30 minutes and then also question and answer. So potentially 45 minutes. So stage is yours.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for being on. You're recording this, right? I'm going to share my screen, and then we don't have to look at my pretty face any longer. But if you do, Daniel, if you see, Andrea or someone raise their hand or something, you can get my attention. But otherwise, I'll try to take my time here and go through it. But I think we'll have some fun with it. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when you can see it. All right.
Yes, we can see it. Just
All right.
presenter mode.
And slideshow from the beginning.
Perfect.
Here we are. So essentially, I use the term checkerboard career because I've had an opportunity to do a great number of things in aviation over the years. And I just give you a little bit of background on myself. I was originally a pilot in our Air Force. And after pilot training, my first job was actually as a crew scheduler. But later on, I finished flying fighters for the Air Force and got out and got a job as a pilot in the airline business. But I learned very quickly that what I really wanted to do was learn how airlines work, how they made money, and understand the business side of the business while I was continuing to do operations and training and those sorts of things. So as a result, I had an opportunity fairly early on when I realized that the little carrier that I was working for here in Florida, we had a terrific month in terms of load factor. And I was so excited till I found out that we actually didn't make any money because we didn't, we were flying, basically giving seats away in order to capture some market share, but we were still operating at a slight negative. So the next day, I went in and introduced myself to the senior vice president of marketing for the airline and said, I'd like to be an unpaid intern. I want to learn about the business. And so he brought in his vice president of sales and marketing there and said, okay, here's what we want you to do. Then teach Bill about the business. And so I got a chance to try a whole number of different areas within the airline. I kid around that I've done everything in an airline except for revenue management, or excuse me, for revenue accounting. And that's the job that I just retired from in January. So
by the way, Bill, we see that potentially you click the right mouse button because we see somehow next CEO slides and so on. At least I see it on the screen, so it's covering maybe 10% of your slide.
Oh, all right.
Now it's gone. Yeah, perfect.
Did that help?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, the next thing I wanted to mention is that I also had a chance early on in my career to work on the very first version of a fair and equitable scheduling system at a non-union carrier I was at before anybody else was really doing that. And during the career, I ended up having a chance to fly as captain for 2 different airlines and worked on several different startup airlines in management positions. And I just wanted to know everything I could about the business. And so I jumped at a lot of chances to learn something new. And I happened to have roles and leadership positions in marketing and route planning, and obviously in scheduling, charters, cargo, revenue management, schedule planning, pricing, and even ground ops. And over the years, I was an airline captain, a consultant for a period of time, an airport director of marketing, a VP of operations, a VP of marketing, and among other things. So what I wanted to do today is tell a few stories, but basically, after flying, I joined a consulting firm, and we were acquired by Sabre. And so for the last part of my career, I turned to providing software solutions to airlines around the world. And at one point, I mentioned to Daniel earlier, I even worked as a reseller for IBS, for Crew and Operations Management many years ago. For years, I knew Daniel as a competitor and then as well as a colleague in the Agafor's working groups for Crew and Operations. Over the years, I've had the privilege of working with some of the world's largest airlines, providing software systems and consulting in the areas of crew, operations, flight safety, and maintenance. And in all of these experiences, I've learned some valuable lessons and really became just a storyteller. So with that, I'd like to share just a couple of stories with you today. Well, so again, this is just a little recap, but basically the kind of the punchline here is I wanted to know everything I was to know about the airline business. So first story, I've got a picture of an L-1011 here. For those of you that haven't been in the business a long time like me, the L-1011 was a wide body that was in widespread use about the same time as the DC-10, for example. But the story goes, as at the time, I was a vice president of sales for a charter brokerage out in New Mexico, and we'd recently started providing chartered aircraft to support the motion picture industry. And I was working with the production staff on the second movie in the series of Die Hard. And this was the one that involved Bruce Willis, who was fighting to reopen Dulles Airport after terrorists had shut it down in the winter. And so at one point, the production manager called me and said they needed a red L-1011 to shoot the interior and exterior scenes for the climactic finish to the movie. And the art director had already spent an enormous amount of time and effort, just exactly how he wanted this, and he needed a red 1011. Well, I literally scoured the globe, reaching out to every known operator or owner of an L-1011 aircraft, and there were no carriers anywhere that were operating a fully red L-1011. So I called the line producer and I explained that we were at a loss. I couldn't find a red L-1011. And a short while later, a few minutes actually, the executive producer of the film, Joel Silver at the time, called me back and he delivered this scathing verbal beatdown. How I was costing them a fortune. I was ruining what was going to be the greatest blockbuster ever. And he was, using thousands and thousands of dollars a day in delays because we weren't going to be able to meet his schedule. Incredibly, just an hour later, I got a call back from the charter manager at Hawaiian Airlines. And they had just learned that they had an L-1011 coming out of a seat check early, and they could make it available in a few days for a 5-day shoot in northern Michigan, where the film was going to be shooting the final scenes in the snow, where there was still snow that time of year. The plane wasn't red, and the cost of transforming one of these Hawaiian Airline planes into a red L-1011 was going to be a challenge because the cost of unpainting it, stripping it down, painting it, and then having to strip it down again and repaint it in Hawaiian livery was going to be cost prohibitive. However, I had some friends. Excuse me. I had some. How did I do that? There we go. I had some friends at what they call the aircraft boneyard, which was the Evergreen Aviation storage area out in Marana, Arizona, who told me that what they could do is they could apply a mixture of mop and globe floor wax mixed with red dye powder to make a temporary paint job on the plane, and then they could wash it off after the shoot. So I called the line producer back and pitched my solution, which the film immediately agreed to. Considering the effort we put into finding this unorthodox solution for a seemingly impossible task, they were happy to pay for it. We ended up doing $1 million worth of business with that airline on that film alone, and it led to several more engagements with a number of Hollywood studios. So again, a reminder, the contacts at the Arizona Boneyard provided the creative workaround so that we could wash off the wax coating after filming without having to pay the prohibitive cost, result in $1 million worth of business. And so I would encourage you at the if you ever watch this movie, and it's obviously it's available on streaming, but if you ever watch Die Hard or Die Hard 2, at the end, look very closely at the top of the fuselage as the snow melts. Now here's a picture of what that looks like, and essentially you'll notice on the very top of the airplane where it's some of the mop and glow is starting to melt as the ice and snow are melting and taking away some of that. But this is the climatic scene where he's rescued his wife and the plane that she was on from crashing for running out of fuel, and they're all happy and singing "Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow." So all's well that ends well.
Have you been mentioned at the closing in this movie where all the names are mentioned as one of the contributors of the movie?
I wish I didn't think to negotiate that at the beginning when we first started working with them, and so by the time we got it to that point, I was not able to get a credit. No.
Shame on the producers.
Shame on me. I should have done that. Seen that coming earlier when I had them over a barrel, but I didn't do that. Anyway, the two lessons that I really learned from that is when your customer, or when it could be an internal customer, it could be an external customer, but when someone says to you, "Can you do this?" What I learned, particularly in the charter business, is the answer is always yes. And then you wait a beat, and then you follow up with, "Okay, may I assume that money is no object?" Now, there are occasionally customers, and when I had my own charter brokerage, I built my business around this, who answer the question, "Yes, money's no object. I just want this." In which case, the answer is clearly yes. But most customers have asked for something that they think is reasonable, but may not be very feasible. So as a result, when you ask if money's no object, and they say, "Well, no, of course money's an object," then it gives you the opportunity to say, "Let me explain a different approach that will probably get you to what you're trying to do without having to cost that much." And then the second thing, the lesson we learned, is that at the end of the day, success is where luck meets preparation. I felt very lucky when I happened to get the opportunity to do this with the L 1011 from Hawaiian Airlines, because when we first asked that question and we're searching everywhere, that availability wasn't available. It didn't exist when we first called. But two reasons. Number one, we had been working with that charter company before, and so when the plane became available, he knew I was looking and called back. Second, having gone out, spent time to find out what they could do and meet the people and get to know the people at the Boneyard, made that creative solution possible. Okay, the next story I want to talk about is a situation I call "What I Really Need Is This." And no, that's not me when I was younger. And basically, that's just the idea of I had an opportunity to meet with the COO of one of the world's largest airlines. And I had gone in with the idea that I wanted to pitch a solution to a problem that I'd become aware of that they had in their flight crew training scheduling. And as I got into that, a few minutes in, the COO stopped me and asked if we couldn't do something different instead. He said, "I'd like you to see if you could help our engineering team develop a predictive maintenance program." Now, I had recently worked in this field at Teleris, which was a joint venture between GE Aviation and Accenture. And I explained that some years of experience in this, we had some years of experience with this emerging technology. However, I told him that we didn't have all the answers and that the program needed an ongoing iterative process. He explained to me that all the major players in the industry, including Boeing, Airbus, IBM, Microsoft, etc., had all approached him with the same generic message, which was, give us all your data and we'll sell some of it back to you. He told me that I was the only one that hadn't tried to push their versions of a hands-off solution to the airline. What the COO really wanted was a partner to share their knowledge and enable the airline to continue building out their predictive maintenance program. A few days later, I got a call from the VP of Engineering, who arranged a meeting with the senior staff to develop the outline of a plan. We ended up creating a team of data scientists, developers, and myself, who had a daily briefing with our counterparts at A Maintenance for a 6-month phase 1 engagement. Working in harmony, we developed, tested, and introduced a number of condition indicators and procedures that significantly helped identify components likely to fail and the most appropriate corrective actions to create the accurate fix. We then developed a methodology for tracking our records and how to monetize the results. So here's what it was. I went in, here's what I learned. I went in thinking that I understood what they needed, but that wasn't the priority for the COO. He wanted to see what could be done, but on the airline's terms, using their data. I explained that we were in the research phase, but we didn't have all the answers. So the result was a successful engagement for our team of data scientists and engineers who teach the airline develop their own capabilities with their own unique data. And one of the things that I was the most excited about is that my entire team was given badges where we had full access to the airline's offices and so forth for the duration of the project, with the exception of their operation control center, which was still off limits. And so we had to be escorted there. But everywhere else, we had free range to go in and spend time on site as virtually as contract employees. So the difference is there's an old province that say, if I give you a fish, I can feed you for a day. But if I teach you to fish, I can feed you for a lifetime. And so what they were looking to do is find someone who was willing to partner and teach them to fish. So my key takeaways were, you don't have to know it all. The C-level executives are looking for outcomes, and they want the outcomes that will produce measurable results. And then finally, as number 2, people do business with people they trust. We were not the first vendor who discussed predictive maintenance with this airline. We were the ones that were willing to work in partnership to help build their own capability. The third story I called You Believe in Miracles. And this is not about crew scheduling per se, but it's about an airline situation that I think you can all relate to. So I would ask, if you don't recognize this, this is a character from Peter Pan, the children's story about Peter Pan. And this is a picture of a character in one of the movies Disney did of Tinkerbell, who is the fairy and the close friend of the children in the movie. So in this particular case, some years ago, I was the VP of marketing for a startup airline out in the Midwest United States. And one of my roles included fundraising and raising public awareness for the airline. I was giving a lot of speeches and speaking engagements to investors and also sometimes potential customers. Now, one of our largest investors was a major insurance company in our home market, and they invited me to speak to their employees at the headquarters. Well, this company had a big auditorium that seated 750 people, and we scheduled 2 presentations one day in early spring. There was a huge screen at the rear of the stage to project my PowerPoint slides, and I was outfitted with a lapel microphone and a wireless air mouse, which was state of the art back then. The morning session was completely packed, and the presentation went off without a hitch. After lunch, another group filled the auditorium and evidently got up in my presentation. I was a bit concerned my talk right after lunch might be tougher to keep the attention of the audience. But about a third of the way in, as I was transitioning to one of my key messages, I ran into trouble. I stopped, I tried again, still nothing. Finally, I paced over near the computer running the show and tried again. No luck. It was time to make a decision. I could shut down the slideshow and stand all alone on that big stage and blame it on a computer malfunction, or I could give it one last try. I explained to my audience that despite the bit of technical difficulty, I believed together we could solve the problem. I asked them to close their eyes. I told them that I was going to count to 3, and that if they all wished really hard for the system to work and believed it would, it would. I slowly counted out loud. 1. Wait, first I said, okay, you have to close your eyes. About 2/3 of them did, but I could see that there were still some non-believers and they still had their eyes open. So I reminded them that I needed everyone to believe and that we were going to do this together. So I counted out 1, 2, 3, and clapped my hands. I clicked the mouse one last time, and voila, the screen came alive. The audience let out a gasp and then gave a thunderous applause. The rest of the talk came and went without further issues, and the audience was totally engaged for the rest of the presentation. So what were the lessons I learned from that experience? Never discount the power of collective belief. A group that genuinely buys into a vision and works well together can achieve things that seem impossible. And I can tell you from my experience, the energy in that room that day was real. And then 2, people want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And this goes to culture and particularly startups. But the real topic was organizational culture. And a startup succeeds against the odds, which are formidable, when everyone supports a vision and one another. So those are my 3 little stories today. But the thing that I wanted to talk about, my journey in the aviation business over the last many years, is that one lesson rises above all the others. The thing that lasts is that the relationships you build along the way. Customers may not always love your product or your pricing. They'll never forget that you are honest with them. When you tell a customer what you can do instead of promising what you can't, and then deliver it, that's how you earn trust. And trust is the foundation that makes customers willing to share those problems that they want you to help solve. There's nothing more powerful as a salesperson than having the customer say, Bill, that's fine. Here's what I'd like you to sell me. And that doesn't happen overnight. That happens over building trust takes time, and it happens over a long period of successful operations together where the customers learn that you're going to do what you say you do. And finally, aviation is obviously populated by some of the greatest people in the world, and it's been my privilege to work alongside of them. So that concludes the little PowerPoint I had for you today.
Thank you, Bill. This was quite insightful. And I remember when you were mentioning this in the beginning that we were competitors and we were colleagues. I think we met when you were working for Talaris. And I think this would be one of my questions. You were not talking about the holy grail of disruption management, but what is your in hindsight view on this disruption management, what the industry is chasing, and what would be maybe your recommendation for the future in terms of disruption management? Because this is the number one topic I'm meeting everywhere in the world. You was just mentioning you earn trust when you say what you can do. And on the other hand, I think there are so many who promise something which could be never delivered. So what would be your recommendation around disruption management?
Well, let me give some kudos while we're here. Some of the things that you've been talking about completely resonate. One of the things early on is when IBS introduced a solution for disruption management, one of the things that you offered was, if I'm not mistaken, was a 70% solution. And so instead of running any optimization can run and run and run forever if you don't constrain it properly. But there's an old maxim about anything in optimization, which is a good solution executed now is 1,000 times better than a perfect solution later. And so the other thing that I would mention in going to your solution is we're all trying to struggle with how are we going to integrate AI? How are we going to live with a world in which people believe that AI can do everything, when in fact, what AI can do, and I'll tell you, I believe that in predictive maintenance, for example, AI can do the things that just take time. That's what AI does well. But as you've been pointing out over and over again, doing the same old things faster just means you're doing them faster. You're not getting any better results. And again, as you know, Daniel, I used to live in Texas, but we have an old saying over in Texas: if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. And that's exactly what's going on. So what I see in disruption management is the idea that in any AI solution, the trick is to figure out what the ultimate outcome is, and then figure out what is it that you're trying to build from a framework that will allow that to do better work, and then use AI to do it quicker. But until you build the framework, until you truly understand the outcome, all we're doing is we're basically jumping on the bandwagon or a fan. But if you're not actually rebuilding the platform, if you're not finding a better way to achieve the outcome, then all you're doing is speeding up what you're doing wrong.
And imagine you can travel back in the past and you can use AI from the year 2026. And now you go through some of your meetings, some of your sales pitches, some of your projects. Would have AI helped you way better? Or is it too early to say AI is really the game changer in the business? Because you were talking about relationships and so on, and AI will never replace relationships, but it will
Correct.
save you time. So would AI help you a lot in your career?
Obviously AI wasn't there in the early days, but what I found about AI and where I'm starting to think about it is, for example, I use predictive maintenance, which is near and dear to my heart. Where I see agentic AI being helpful is once you figure out how to basically the framework by which you're building the condition indicators that look at specific data that's coming into you from the aircraft, and then you're able to tie that together with the maintenance records to see what's been done in the past and so forth, and then you use natural language programming. What agentic AI can do is it takes that information and says, what worked? Okay, how do I project that so that you don't have to write those things? You don't have to write the code for that every single time. That's where I see it making huge leaps in terms of the efficiency of building it out. Now, someone with an engineer is still going to have to look at that and say, okay, is this giving us what we want? So there's a quality control aspect to it. But in terms of the sheer bulk of time it takes and the iterations, that's where AI really comes to play for me. And so I've been trying to look at what are the sorts of things that myself or my customers could do to say, okay, if I could do this, how could AI speed up the busy work part of that? How could AI learn from what it just did here and go forward to the next thing without me having to initially write prompts or all that? So that's the part of AI that's really exciting to me, is the agentic AI can do some things that will take the busy work out of us having to keep telling it what we want it to do.
Of course, in such a talk, everybody is only talking about the good things. And also when we go on conference, we only hear success stories.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very tough to hear something which was not going so well. And I think, and that's why I always try to poke the bear, because I think from every mistake, it's a learning. So if you consider some of the mistakes maybe you made or other people made, what is for you, which are the top 3 topics, issues, limitations the industry finally needs to tackle? Because either it was going on your nerves yourself, you were getting crazy, and you would love to not hear this in 10 or 20 years again, because the industry finally tackled these 1, 2, 3 items which are necessary to change.
Well, again, I'm going to pick on you because one of the things that you've mentioned that I saw certainly at Agaforce is that we keep coming to Agaforce and talking about tweaking the algorithms. And I understand that basically because it's operations research and research scientists and students a lot of times, they're working on how do I do that? However, it requires industry veterans to say, here's what we need. How do you solve that, as opposed to how do you make it do the same thing everybody else is doing faster? Now, going back to mistakes I've made, and God knows there's plenty. One of the great failures I had is I worked for an airline in South America for over a year, trying to demonstrate to them how much money I could save them if we did certain things in terms of optimization. And for whatever reason, they let a consultant that they were working with on some other stuff decide to explain to them, oh, let us evaluate this and see if the savings are real and so forth. And the airline came back and told us, okay, we don't spend any money on repatriating bags that are lost or misconnected. And I said, that can't possibly be true. You lose people's bags, you have to get a van and you have to deliver them to their hotel or their homes or whatever. I said, there's a cost to that. And so I never was able to make them understand that there are hard costs, there are soft costs, but you have to look at the entire picture when you're figuring out what this does. And they were so convinced that a disruption only costs them $2.50 a minute. And I said, okay, yeah, exactly. I said, okay, you could be the most efficient 737 operator on the planet. I doubt it, but maybe you are, okay? But if you took the average of all the other 737 operators that have told me a delay minute costs X, and you're telling me it costs X divided by 90, come on. I fail to get across the message that there are true costs, but you can't build an ROI if you haven't started off at the beginning with a true understanding of what your costs are. And so I see a lot of carriers that have been the same place. The hardest thing is to get people to actually admit that a delay costs them X amount of dollars or marks or whatever. So that was one. I think certainly in the software business, I'd say one of the things that I learned is that it took me a long time to be able to reach out to people and say, look, you said you wanted this, so now you've gone through this exhaustive RFP process that you put together to make us build you a system that does everything yours does now, but maybe adds a couple things. And the better way to approach that would be, let's go through each of the processes that you have to solve and determine what the outcome is. And then if it turns out that we can show you how we solve all those outcomes, maybe you don't need that little widget here. Maybe you don't need this. And I watched carriers put themselves through loops and loops and loops and loops on that process. And so I said, I've got to get a better way of convincing them to go into the outcome. And in all fairness, for the most of my career, I didn't realize that the only thing that really mattered to the people that write checks are the outcomes. Is it how do we measure that it's going to save us money or it's going to make us money? And if it's not doing one of those two things, it's what they call a nice to have. And nobody in the C level wants to write a check for something nice to have.
So I think this is exactly also the biggest problem I see, that these RFPs are a waste of time. A lot of energy is wasted, and at the end, the outcome is very poor. We have a question from Yusuf.
Hello. Hi, Bill. I have two questions, but a comment precedes them.
Okay.
My first comment is I completely agree with you about having honest relationships and trust with the customer. Occasionally, it loses me a sale, but in the long term, it makes me more successful. So I completely agree with that. In my recent life, in the last few months, I've been helping some colleagues and a company that's a startup trying some new things and giving them some ideas about using AI and ops control. And to be honest, whenever I suggest some things and I say, hey, I've done this in flight scheduling, it will help you in ops control area and disruption, usually the answer is, no, you don't know, and they move on. But that's fine. Now, here are my questions. So the first one is a little bit tricky, and if you want to avoid it, that's fine. But the second one, I think you'll be able to give very concrete answers. The first question is, which airline did you have the most success with in achieving the goals of the airline? And the second question is, have you ever had a situation where you were the broker between the VP of network planning and scheduling and the VP for operations, and you had to get them to agree to a common set of KPIs?
Okay. I'll answer the first one would be, I spent several years at GE as a key account executive. And I would say that I probably had the most success with American Airlines in terms of helping them get the desired results. We were working with their safety program, which worked very, very closely with them to provide the data they needed to improve their safety program. And the story I told about a meeting with the COO to develop the predictive maintenance program, again, they came up with some very positive results from that study we did, or that project we did with them, with our data scientists and myself. And then on the maintenance record side, we basically kept forcing them to tell us what is the outcome we needed, and kept building our tool that we had they've been using for years, building out better solutions that kept giving them the outcomes they were looking. So they helped me really focus on outcomes. And second of all, they probably in 4 or 5 different products that we have on board with them, each one of those we're able to kind of go that direction. So that would probably be my best example. Second one was obviously much more of a challenge, and where I ran into that was down at LATAM in Chile, and I had won an RFP, and we sold them an entire portfolio of solutions that it covered revenue management, operations, crew scheduling, some station operations and things and so forth and so on. Getting them at that level to agree on what was important was really a challenge. And we literally ended up with a 351-page contract that took me weeks to negotiate, and then took 4 or 5 days on site doing a page turn, literally sentence by sentence through all of that thing in order to get something that we ultimately agreed upon. But it's a huge problem, and I know exactly where you're coming from, Yusuf.
Okay. Well, thank you for the AA shout out. I did work for American many years ago, and it's 100-year anniversary, so thanks for that one. But the second one is my current challenge, getting the different departments to agree with each other. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the audience? People are speechless, Bill. That's good. So I think you did a great job. I think what you were mentioning, especially also on this AI topic, is spot on. I'm an 80-20 guy, and I believe 80% is good enough. We had this talk last June from Lavanya Mala. I will soon post another article, because more and more neuroscientific research are proving that initially the first solution is always the best one, and spending more time and so on. So there is a lot of insights on this holy grail of disruption management and so on. So I have huge hopes for this AI topic. Of course, AI is never the solution for everything. And I love that you were mentioning relationship, because I think that's exactly the biggest asset in our industry, having relationship. One always meets twice in a lifetime. Now I think it's our 3rd or 4th time, and now you're a speaker here at Enigma, and I hope maybe we have the opportunity to see each other in person at one of the upcoming conferences. Hopefully you will ping me if you attend one, or maybe you give a speech there. And yeah, thank you very much for your amazing career, and I hope you have a good time as a retiree, or if you're now starting to do another business here and there. I think it's also the golden age for the experienced people in our industry. That's what I'm reading. Especially the older guys benefit from the age of AI. So I think that's something which is also in your favor. Thank you very much. And just looking into the future, because for next month, we have another interesting conversation about the human performance, because Lea Sophie Trampel-Schwing made an amazing study and found out that only 4% is the difference, the personal individual difference in a highly regulated aviation environment. So that's really interesting. People always say, oh, we have to train the people, which means we are focusing primarily on the 4%, and the money on the table is for the 96%, which is the system and the environment. And I think that will be a very insightful talk too. So I encourage everybody signing up for this one. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And if we are not seeing each other soon again, have a fantastic summer. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Daniel.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.